All right. Hey, party people. Very excited. My name is Nikki Adamson. So stoked to run Hustle Hunters, which is a recruiting firm. I work with early stage startups, and I'm always thinking through how do we build amazing teams together. And as we're thinking through that concept, so often the topic of, well, how do I organize my team? And how do we think about compensation? And how do we think about equity? And also, we're wearing 75 hats comes up so often. So, Haris, I've done a lot of vetting out in the space. Met you and your team at Transform recently, giant conference for people leaders and technology that supports people leaders. So I'm really excited, Haris, to be able to bring you onto the show, onto our webinar today, and be able to share a little bit more information to help these early stage teams who are doing all the things possible and then some, how to think about compensation bands, how to demystify that topic, and welcome.
Yeah, lovely to meet you at Transform as well, and excited to be here. Happy to chat more about this.
Yeah, awesome. Well, as folks join, welcome, folks watching on a replay. We're so glad to have you here. We know that time is our most valuable resource. And always excited when somebody shows up to kind of see the content we put through. Haris and I spent a lot of time thinking through what is truly valuable here. And I think both of us are in the startup space because the thing we wanted didn't exist. So Haris, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit of like your intro, like what is CandorIQ? How did you get here? I love your story of how you come up with this idea.
Absolutely. There's a professional side to this and a personal side. Maybe I'll touch on a little bit of both. On the professional side, I've been the chief product officer at a number of unicorn companies, Checker in the background check space. I was VP at Salesforce, at Blend Labs, a fintech that went public. And I managed a team of 100 plus people at some of these organizations. And the larger my team grew, the more difficult it was to kind of manage comp, whether it was, for hiring decisions, whether it was for employee retention, whether it was balancing comp and budget. I found it very tricky. And going from company to company, there's a number of solutions that had bits and pieces, but none of it brought it together. So that was a pain point I felt multiple times over as an operator, as a leader. So that's on the professional side. On the personal side, I've driving transparency and understanding around pay is something I care about. I was an immigrant to the U.S. 20 years ago now. My accent comes out if I'm inebriated a little bit. but yeah, so as an immigrant, like my first few years, my pay information was all on the website. Anyone can go find it because like if you're in the H-1B process, and it was a little bit unfair. And ultimately, like my belief is meritocracy should win. The best and brightest people should get paid the most, and all of that, pay for performance and hitting goals and objectives, and less so where you come from. So I have a kind of a personal chip on the shoulder as well around making sure businesses are successful in terms of having the right pay strategy, but so are employees and candidates as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And it's such an interesting thing to be talking about today because last night, Caitlin Clark was drafted by the Indiana Fever. She is, the it thing in all basketball, right? People are watching her play more than any other basketball professional, college, men's, women's, anything than ever before. And she just signed a 4-year contract for $338,000. So that's less than 6 figures a year to play professional basketball in the WNBA, when every single other rookie in the NBA is making, millions of dollars over a similar time period or shorter. So, but we get to have that conversation because those salaries are transparent, right? And we get to think now, okay, this feels like, it feels very unequal, right? Within the same organization to have this play out. So that's on kind of this like giant scale where it just doesn't sit right with us, right? This knowledge that two people are doing a very similar job and getting paid really differently. But then when we kind of like zero it down to our startup scale, right at the end of the day, we have budgets and we have money and we're trying to figure out, well, what do we pay our engineers? And maybe that's a more important role, or maybe our sales role is a more important role, and that has different, that's base and OTE with commission, right? How do we think about these things? So my question for you, Haris, is why is it important to even professionalize and operationalize compensation and leveling? I want to make sure that like we have a little bit of level setting on like, why even do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's maybe three buckets. One is for on the hiring side. Let's start there. If we think about this as a funnel, right, which it is, you want to have the right people in the right role. So compensation is not just about the dollars, how much base someone's making or bonus or variable. It's also what level, what title, what's their job description, what's the scope, all of those things. Where are you hiring them? So it's
And I
about
will
bringing
say,
in,
to interject there, that is
yeah,
the piece that I find most early startups really, when struggle is not the right word, but they know they have to get right. And it is the hardest to get right. And because we're kind of approaching each one as a totally new function. And often we're asking someone to be both the operator and the strategist and the executor. Right. So it ends up being kind
that's
of
right, yeah.
this piece. So yeah, you breezed right through that. But like that is the crux of this piece around compensation, but also that's the crux of all the hiring that we do, right? That's the biggest challenge that most of the work that I do is like that pre-scoping role. I never knew how important that was going to be until I got into this. And 5 years later, I realized that's actually the biggest value that we can bring to the table is holding space for that pre-scope and leveling.
Exactly, and I've certainly made that mistake as as I was an operator, and when I was a first time manager, I learned it the hard way. Sometimes they're amazing people, but they have slightly different skill sets or levels of experiences than what you need and what you need 18 months from now. So you kind of have to think through this really, um, and so you're absolutely right. So thanks for calling that out. Right. So first is just hiring the right people. Comp is not just about dollars. It's actually about like the right skills, the right level, the right competency, the right experience, etc. And also, when you're building a company, when you're building a team, you're going back to the basketball analogy. You want people with like a mix of different experiences and backgrounds too. And so you want to think about this as a portfolio strategy. Like if you're bringing in 6 engineers, they're not they shouldn't be exactly the same. Like they should actually, in fact, be different and have different skill sets: front end, back end, AI, machine learning, like full stack, etc. Like there's many different ways to kind of carve the pumpkin, but it's really thinking through those things. So that's one piece of the puzzle. Then the second piece is, now that you've brought these people, you want them to be happy. How are they going to be and successful? How are they going to be happy? Hopefully, they're doing meaningful work. They have good managers. They believe in the mission of the company. They're driving impact. Those things are certainly very important. The other piece of it is, humans like to kind of feel progress in life, right? It's as core to being a human as many other things, like as being social. And people want to see progression in their careers. They want feedback loops. They want to know, are they doing a good job or a bad job? Like what do they need to get to get to the next level? So the second part of it is about retaining employees, helping them understand their career ladders. Part of it's unlocking more comp for sure, but it's also, how does their scope change and expand as well? So that's the second piece of puzzle, like retaining these employees and motivating them, like building out that career ladder and having, managers understand it, not just the HR team, not just the executives, helping employees understand it. That's important as well.
Yeah,
So
and of course, I was learning about a company this last week, and they have a team, and it's a really critical team in the business. But they're looking externally to bring in a new manager when a manager left, and the team is really downtrodden, saying, "Wait a second, we've been here for a while. Why aren't we being promoted into that leadership position?" And that realization has been like, no one ever thought about what progression looked like. They're all missing really critical leadership components to become that manager because there wasn't a path. It was kind of only focused on like what you do today without kind of thinking about this piece down the road. So yeah, seeing folks struggle with that. I'm so glad you brought it up because we are progress oriented as humans. And so often it needs to be a dance, right? And you need to have both the manager and the employee and then the rest of the team kind of thinking like what comes next as this building happens together.
Totally, and some, and I think it also helps provide feedback and help people grow as well. And so it's, if someone's maybe not meeting the mark, to your point, like why is that, and like what are the gaps, and it's an opportunity to work with them. And I believe this conversation should be continuous. You shouldn't just have a performance review once a year or twice a year. Yes, you do need some kind of checkpoints. But as a manager, you want to understand your employees' goals, their performance, their comp, where they are, where they need to be, what the market's also saying about comp, because part of retention is also, yes, what they're making at the company, but also what the market pull. And in a boom market, there was like very high churn, because like people could easily go to the place next door and get 20-30%. It's a little slower than that, but it's still something to keep in mind, right? Especially for the top performers. There's always opportunity for the top performers to kind of rotate.
Yeah, and we don't have to leave our company to make more money. And we hear that all the time, especially in the startup space. Right. And I think it's because we're so focused on this big goal that we forget sometimes that our biggest investment is in our people, and that these people are building and building, but assuming that, if they keep building and building, there's going to be progression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a way to kind of incent and reward the right behavior, right? So like the people who are doing a great job and achieving the goals, whether it's in sales, whether it's in engineering, the other folks in the team will emulate too. Say like, okay, wow, this person, Jane or John are doing exceptionally well. They've progressed. They're, and what are they doing? It's a great way for people to kind of self-reflect and think about how they can, do more for the company too. So it's also about helping align these folks to the right like behavior and performance and company goals too. So that's a key part as well.
Yeah, thanks so much for helping me set the stage here. So I'm excited to kind of now get into like a little bit more tactical pieces. And the reason that I kind of was searching for this solution is I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation about a role. We even understand the scoping. There's all this alignment. And we get to the end of our kickoff call and we'll say like, let's confirm and talk about compensation. And then all of a sudden it's like, and you can almost feel the like bodies withdrawing from the conversation because it feels icky. And the reason there is because oftentimes A, they're not sure. We need some help on benchmarking. And then B, there's a lot of like, okay, great, let's put this on the job description because that's, how we get great talent, because so many states are actually requiring that by law at this point. And then I hear, but I don't want my team to know how much this role is going to be compensated. So I hear that so often. And then I kind of probe in deeper and hear, well, it's because we believe in pay transparency, but we haven't done the work to make it happen internally yet. So we want to get there, but we're not sure how to build out these levels and get there. And I find that I check in, 6 months, 12 months later, and I realize we're actually still in a similar place, right? So this is a topic that until I've seen teams build out really strong, like 3-4 person people operations teams, I really haven't seen this tackled often. Or if someone tackles it, it's this huge behemoth of a project. So I'm really excited today, Haris, to have you just like kind of help me understand, what is this? What are we doing here when we think, what does the lift look like to actually be able to build out some compensation bands? How does CandorIQ help us do that? And how do we solve that problem so that we have a better sense of confidence when we put together a job offer or think about internal progression?
Sure. Yeah. And, there's a lot you can do here. There's comp consultants who can spend months with you, and there's a lot of big projects, and you can flesh out every comp type from cash, equity, bonus, and by geo. So there's a lot of complexity. And I think that's part of what's made it challenging is people feel overwhelmed. There's so many different variables. There's so much data. How do I make sense of data? What's right? What's competitive? And yes, like for many, larger companies, having a 3 to 6 month project makes sense, but really, like, you don't have to do all of that to start. You can do this in an iterative manner, especially if you are a younger organization or doing it for the first time. So maybe let's unpack that a little bit, and we, happy to talk about CandorIQ, of course. And what I encourage, some of our smaller customers to do, and smaller organizations, is first just take a look at your current employees. Like, what do you want to achieve? Like, what are the challenges you want to solve, right? So comp is a means to an end. It's not the end itself. Is it, are you trying to aggressively hire more? Like maybe, like you give an example, maybe someone wants to hire like double their sales team. So you want to be a bit more competitive. Otherwise, it's just going to take a lot longer to hire the right people and bring in the right level of seniority, maturity, et cetera. Or it might be more around retention. So you want to see what the goals are that you want to focus on. Number two, you don't have to do comp for your whole company on day one, to be honest, as well. You can pick and choose the areas where you focus, where you're hiring or where you have a big team. At least in tech, often it's sales and engineering teams. They're like the two largest organizations, maybe followed by CS or some other functions. And so you can also say, let's start with one job family, one department, and flesh it out. Look at and so you can slice it that way. The other way you can kind of scope this down to really get started is then say, let's look at our employees and let's look at the market data. Ultimately, it's not about the benchmarking data that will keep changing. It's about your pay strategy. What are your levels and what are your pay ranges, and what target are you aiming for getting most people at, right? And defining that. And so doing a light audit of, let's say, your engineering department, saying, where do employees sit? Are they at the 50th, 65th, 75th percentile? Are we losing a lot of hires? Is it taking us a long time? Do we need to be more aggressive, or we feel good about where we are, right? Like if you do a lightweight sanity check, you might realize like, okay, no, we're paying 65th percentile. There's no reason for us to pay 75th or 90th, because like that might be the outcome. Or you might realize, no, actually, like as a company philosophy, we want to have the best talent. We want to hire quickly. We want to pay them the 75th or 90th. So you want to figure out what your philosophy is, do a light audit with your existing employees, and use that to say, okay, that makes sense. Like, this is our target. And then from there, you can build out the ranges, right? And you don't have to build complicated ranges. You can say very typically like plus minus 20% or 25% from that midpoint target is a pretty reasonable way to start. And if you have that, like that's a large part of the work. Now you can explain to folks, hey, this is our comp philosophy. We're more cash heavy, we're more equity heavy, or one or the other, or like this is what our total package looks like. Here's our target, and here's what our bands look like. You've already done, let's say, 70% of the work, right? So that's not that tough. So that's what I would encourage folks to do. CandorIQ can help in a number of different ways. One, we do 3 different things. One, we have compensation data in the US and globally. We have millions of records. So we have a really big data set. You need that. Number 2, we can connect to your HRIS or payroll system if you wanted to do that. So we also know instantly your employees and how much they're making. So you don't have to do that analysis of what the difference is. We will do that for you. The platform has analytics and merit cycle and many other things that we can kind of get into. But there's a software part of this. And number 3, we do have comp advisory as well. So ultimately, we've built the product to be self-serve, so you can do all of this yourself and you don't need us. But when you're first going, like understanding how to read the data, how doing a first pass of your bands and levels, it can be sometimes it can be helpful to have folks who've done it many times, hundreds of times, thousands of times, if not. And so we can do that as well. But we've built all of this, so it's like a circular thing. As in, once you're set up, we'll automatically flag if there's a pay discrepancy by performance or department or gender or race, like what the things that are important to you. If you have what your churn risk looks like, your offer higher win-loss ratios, things like that. So you can maintain your pay strategy, right? And if everything's good and rosy, great. You don't need to change it for a year. But often companies will find that, okay, maybe we need to make some tweaks. We need to like change the comp for sales first, and then maybe for another different department. And we also provide that telemetry, so you can, throughout the year, you can keep viewing that and updating very quickly too.
That's so awesome. Yeah, so many things to unpack here. One, I love how you gave really like bite-sized pieces. We're startups. We think about like our minimum viable product all the time. What is the MVP when it comes here? And this is, I think, the biggest thing I want folks to take away, that I was really excited in learning that this is, we see it as this huge comprehensive project that we have to get right because it's people's income. This is what puts a roof over our heads, right? This is a big thing. And it doesn't have to be this giant project. It can actually be a small project that we take on iteratively, like you mentioned. I think that's so critical. So you mentioned, like, look currently, what are our even goals? You said step number 1, look at your goals. That's one option someone could take away today. Start with one department. It can be a great way to get started. Just kind of thinking about what does that look like in a smaller group, as well as just thinking about today's employees. And I think that's so critical because so often I find, again, like I mentioned, this comes up when we're hiring new people. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, actually, most of our data points are the existing team that we have there today. And I find that in a very lean time like now, like there's no better time when we're not putting as much time towards hiring. This is the perfect opportunity to invest a little bit of time in getting some bites at this project to kind of run through it. Can be so critical. So you mentioned this balance between having experts as well as technology. I personally am a fan whenever there's that intersection. I think that's so important because you get the human side as well as the scale and the ability for technology. Can you talk a little bit about why that balance is so important?
Yeah, and it's a great. I'll draw from my own personal experience. When as a operator and a leader myself, my HR teams and finance teams gave me spreadsheets. Here's the market data, and when I was making hiring decisions, and I couldn't figure out head from tails myself. It took me a while, and so the human aspect is super important, right? Like, let's say I'm building out the sales team. What does an AE account executive look like is slightly different from like BDRs or SDRs or account managers, and there are roles where the nuance is even less subtle than that. Like, those are pretty clear roles, but like in CS, like there can be roles, or in engineering, and so having humans kind of who understand this, provide some guidance, is super helpful, so that you kind of know, is this the right job family? Am I like creating the right job description? Am I finding the right people for what I want to achieve? Is it the right, am I leveling them correctly? In startups, there's a lot of title inflation, and that's a whole topic we can talk about. But decoupling startup and like the level inflation, you definitely want to make sure, independent of their title, you're getting the people with the right skills and the right level set of experience, right? And so sanity checking that a little bit can be helpful. And I feel that I've from doing that once or twice with someone who knows, or can provide input and say, like, this sounds about right. This is what we're seeing in the market. Can save you tons of headache. You don't want to be in a place where you brought in the wrong candidate, and then you realize they're the wrong experience or level of seniority, or you're at the offer stage and their expectations are different from your expectations. And so doing that work upfront saves a lot of headache, saves churn from as a candidate, saves churn as an employee for sure. So yeah, that's what comes to mind.
Yeah, and so much of the leveling is a little bit more ethereal, right? It's like, I want someone who can write the list and do the list, right? We talked about being an executive and a strategist, but then when we tie that into compensation, again, it's just another litmus test, another data point. And I love, then having experts behind that. So I'm curious, Haris, like, how often would you expect a company to plug in just their legacy employees into CandorIQ? How often are you expecting someone to have all over the place in terms of like percentile pay compensation, despite having an established pay strategy? I'm just curious, like, how often would that happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. Anecdotally, so we have customers from spanning from seed stage to public. So from anywhere from like 15 employees all the way to 1,000 plus 2,000 employees, and hopefully when they're larger, that happens less so. But certainly below the 100 employee mark, below Series A, that definitely happens a bunch. I'll give you two examples. We had a customer who joined us last year, had about 60 people, and their comp was a little bit all over the place. They had there are people in Wisconsin making 30% to 40% more than New York Bay Area, at lower levels, and have different skill gap as well. They had the wrong level of people in management as well, and they knew this, and like the way it was impacting them was they weren't able to achieve their goals, whether it was revenue goals, customer retention, product roadmap, etc. Right? And so they knew this, and as soon as they kind of plugged in the system, we pulled in all employee data automatically, and they could see where is there overpay, where there's underpay, where is there a discrepancy. They also realized that even they weren't refreshing employee equity at the right cadence. So and so a lot of the hunches, like within an instant, because of analytics, they were able to kind of see where the problems were. And this wasn't an excuse to lay people off. Actually, they use this to up level the team, right? So they brought in a new VP of CS with the right level. They also kind of did a better job of clearly defining what the geo-based pay should look like in the US, which helped them save a $1.5 million, which is pretty significant.
Just a quick little $1.5 million.
Yeah, because it was a sizable team, and so it was a pretty big win for not just for the people team, but also for finance, because ultimately, like it's the other side of comp is budget, and so I think, yeah, those are some examples.
Yeah, and it sounds like while I work mostly with, seed Series A teams that often have like a chief of staff or a COO or a CEO who's doing this work and kind of taking on this project, it sounds like kind of you built the system for that engineering lead, that marketing lead as they're starting to build their team. And that's like a good step one today would be, even for a marketing leader to come through and say, great, I have a team of 3. Let me really think critically about where this is and maybe go ask my head of sales, go ask the head of product and see like, are we even on the same page, right? To like start building some work internally that we could, even starting with like just understanding your department and kind of how that sits against market data, how that sits against your the company's overall pay strategy. What does that look like? Sounds like that could be a great first step for someone today.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's a core philosophy when we started CandorIQ a couple of years ago, which was a lot of the tools were built, they're really built for like HR folks or finance people. But ultimately, the decision makers, the hiring manager, right, or the department leader, they're the people who have to make sure they hire the right folks and keep them in seat. So we built the product to be that. So thank you for calling it out. It's any manager can come in and look at where their existing team is, how their staff is doing, what the market data is, what their pay strategy is, if there's gaps or opportunities, all of that. Yes, so 100%. The other thing that I'll call out that the people can do on day one is we, especially on the hiring front, we have something called candidate offer. So it's a digital interactive offer experience where Nikki, you or someone on the talent team or the hiring manager can create an offer. As you're creating an offer, we'll show you what the pay range is for that role and level. So hopefully you're sharpening the pencil around that initial offer. Obviously, there's negotiation, but it's also a really great candidate experience, especially as a young company. You want to sell the dream. You want to showcase your equity, your benefits, like why you want to be there. It's not just about dollars, right? It's about like the mission and the team.
Yeah, let them tell the story as part of it, just like a candidate should be more than just that resume. I love that.
Exactly. Tell that story, right? And get them excited about the story and the future and the growth potential and their role. And so our digital offer is you can show their full pay, their equity, how that looks like over the next couple of years, their benefits, their variable comp if you're in sales, for instance, all of that looks like on an annualized basis, the company's mission, vision, customers. It's very customizable, it's interactive, it's self-service. So customers, especially early stage startups, love that feature because like hiring is everything. And so if you can close a candidate a little bit faster, or you can close that one candidate that was on the fence, like that makes all the difference to your business. And so it's actually pretty easy to quantify the value, and we have with many of our customers, because we've seen what the candidate NPS was, or the time to hire was, or
well, you mentioned earlier this theme that compensation is a means to an end. And I think that tool, again, just showcasing that, when we make an offer, we like to talk about the other stuff that was important. Yeah, of course, we all work for money. It's naive to think we don't work for money, but we also work to make an impact. We also work for these other pieces. And so much in my work is spending time thinking, okay, what's the Venn diagram of this candidate's goals and values and that of this role and the opportunities, and how big is the overlap, so that the role and the company and the employee can like continue to evolve together. That to highlight those is a huge part of it as well, right? And I mean, once you have really clear compensation bands, you actually get to be really clear on your job descriptions and in your hiring process that, in my opinion, an offer letter like shouldn't be a surprise in terms of the number, right? The compensation number like shouldn't be a surprise, but it lets you then kind of bring it all together and show kind of what is total comp, not just salary, not just cash, which is so important. And then you mentioned kind of tools for people leaders, but not necessarily for those like de facto people leaders. So I actually walked away from Transform, this giant people leader conference, thinking about the seed and Series A de facto leaders, that chief of staff, that COO, that maybe head of marketing, who also is the like HR person in the business, right? Wearing all these important hats, and kind of walked away thinking like, what are we doing for them? Sounds kind of lonely to be that people leader, but also doing another job. So actually we, starting in May, we're having a small cohort of just 8 folks, kind of bringing them together in community, thinking, what if we pull together all these folks who are doing the benefits, the OKR strategy, the leave projects, building out retreats, thinking about compensation, right? Hiring. What if we bring all those folks together and get to kind of walk through with some experts on some core topics? So that's actually something I'm excited to be launching. It's hustlehunters.com/cohort is where folks can learn more about that. But yeah, just thinking about what are the resources that we can give these folks who people management is one piece of the many hats that they're wearing. All right, Haris, I've got a hard question for you.
All right.
This is something I'm hearing come up a lot, is that kind of the answer we're hoping we don't get if we were to plug our data into CandorIQ or to do an audit of our current employees. We kind of hope that someone's not overpaid, because where do we go from there? What are you seeing in terms of potential success of like decreasing compensation if possible? Because I know like a year and a half ago, all of a sudden we were paying engineers really high, and that's not the market anymore. But now we have engineers here and engineers here doing the same work. So can you talk to me a little bit of what you're seeing and hearing in terms of like, how do we level this back out?
Yeah, that's a great one. That's definitely not a nuanced question. So I'll say this: it's once you've paid someone a certain salary, you can't necessarily pay them less. So that ship usually has sailed. But what I'll say is a few things. One is, yes, salaries have decreased in a number of different roles. I will say the market's starting to pick up, especially in tech over the first quarter of this year, and so it's again starting to be more competitive, especially for growing startups. But for 6 to 9 months of last year, it was tough. Last year was certainly tough, and there was compression. In general, I'll talk about market trends a little bit, and then talk about how we help our customers, kind of think through this. Most companies didn't necessarily decrease their base cash pay as much, because again, as I mentioned, that's usually harder to change because you have existing employees in seat. Where they made adjustments was around equity, and then also bonuses and variable comp as well. So we saw more compression across those things because those are much more flexible levers. So that's what we generally saw across the board. And there's always examples and edge cases and nuances, but also varies from role to role. Some of the roles are even through last year, some roles are harder to fill than other roles. So so that's what we see from a market perspective. The second thing I'll call out is so with our customers, we usually help them think through those things. So one of our customers, what they've done is they're communicating total pay to the employee. They've made some changes around base and reduced base a little bit, like 5 or 7%, going forward, at least for net new employees. But they've not cut that dollar amount away. Like they've shifted that to the bonus pool, right? So and then what that means is they're more incentivizing for performance, pay for performance, right? Saying if you do well, you'll actually in fact take home more pay than you did, your base bonus on an annualized basis, if you're a top performer and aligned with the company's goals and objectives.
Right, shifting the risk of like whoever holds the risk holds the upside. So they're kind of like,
exactly. Okay. Right, which is generally a win-win. If you're a salesperson bringing in the bacon, then sure, yes, it makes sense. Or if you're an engineer whose velocity or impact is like that much deeper, it makes sense. And so that's healthy. So that's some of the type of things that we're doing with our customers, thinking through that too.
Thanks. Yeah, obviously super nuanced, but I know that that's the question that a lot of folks are asking and don't really have great answers to. And I think what I'm reading between the lines of what you're saying is it comes back to the philosophy, comes back to what's our strategy when it comes to pay. So as I think of things that folks can kind of leave today's webinar with, number one for me is thinking like, if you don't have a pay philosophy or a pay strategy, create one. This can be so simple. I think Pave has done a good job of making that really simple to say like, just put in, just figure out what is the percentage that we pay. And that could be a start. I don't think that is holistic. I think we need to go beyond that and think like, who are our people? What are our goals for retention? What are our goals for promotion? What are our goals for like how long we want folks to stay? How are we incentivizing performance? I think so having some answers to those questions seems like pretty great takeaway from today's session. You mentioned a couple of other pieces. So that could be like just doing an audit, a lightweight audit of where is everyone at today. Sounds like reaching out to your team and having a place that you literally could just sign up and have everything be plugged in and get a sense of like, where does everyone sit within the kind of predefined. I think the reason I was intrigued by CandorIQ is that you draft a lot. So someone isn't sitting at a blank page or a blank spreadsheet that basically you are drafting out with your experts what that could look like. I know as a partner, I can be involved in that and help some of my clients kind of do some of that lifting. But it sounds like, someone's already coming with a pretty smart draft, showing up with them. What are some other like takeaways someone could make today to actually take that baby step today to make really big impact on their business?
Yeah. So on the draft front, yes, we have draft for every scale, from 10% to 25% to 50%, 100% company, different scales, and also based off where you're going, how many people you want to hire. So we have industry best practices and templates and guidance, so we can provide that as well. But to your point around like, what are some of the things that people can do today? Access to CandorIQ is pretty easy. You can reach out to me at hikram@candoriq.com or via Nikki or our website. Look at some of the case studies. We can, happy to talk you through some of the details. Customers can really easily set up candidate offers, especially young companies. That's a big win in terms of presenting offers. You don't even need to have your pay ranges to actually use as a tool to make offers. That's very easy to do. The other thing you can do is have immediate access to benchmarking data through us, or connect your HRIS and see where your employees are sitting. Those things take minutes to up to 30 minutes to set up. It's actually a very low lift. And so, those are some of the things that organizations can kind of do pretty immediately. And then long tail, there's a lot more we can do too, but those are some quick, easy wins.
Yeah, I love easy wins. And then if someone is thinking through, like, what are some milestones as they're building this iterative project? Do you have some milestones in mind of like that someone could be thinking through in the future that they would build towards?
Several things. So one is, a few things you can do. So if it comes to like just being more structured around budget, we have a headcount scenario planning tool where you can model out like how many headcount and, based off your revenue goals or other business milestones, where people can collaborate. And again, you don't need a VP of finance or a VP of people here, like the marketing head and the engineering head can do that themselves.
I'm seeing this happen all the time, right? As we start, we have one-person departments. And now as these departments are turning into like head of and they're growing their departments, well, of course, your head of marketing is going to try to build out a great marketing department while your head of engineering is building out a department, and your head of product, now that maybe you've hit a revenue milestone and everyone has been given a little bit of a green light to grow. Well, how do we prioritize? Can we do 5, 5, and 5? Can we do 1, 1, and 1? What does that look like? I think that's where like
exactly. And how do you want to sequence them? Because is there a point hiring like 4 AEs and you don't have the product marketer to create the content? Like, so you can also the headcount requests and approvals, you can track in the system and prioritize it. So everyone, the leadership team, and Nikki, you, for example, as well, can see that, and you have alignment on here's the roles we're going to go out after, and in this order, and so that's pretty helpful for growing organizations too. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. And then I think the other big takeaway, if I was listening to this and I was hiring for a team, is hiring is really hard, and the people business is really challenging, right? Because it's more than just rational thought. We're humans. We have so many different motivations and ideas and needs and goals, and those can change day to day. But it's also really expensive. This is where as companies, we're spending 75% of our money on our people, right? So knowing that there's experts out there like Haris, like myself, who are really excited to get in the weeds to really help founders and help early team leaders understand where folks have gone wrong and where folks have gone right. I don't think no one needs to be an expert on this. I think we expect so much of founders, right? And actually just tapping in the right folks can be so critical. Awesome. So you mentioned that folks can get in touch with you today. I'll throw that on this event. Anyone that we send the video to will be able to get this. You said email, also the CandorIQ website. I'm at hustlehunters.com. Nikki at hustlehunters.com is my email. And then I'll also drop in our LinkedIn's as well. Haris, I'm so thrilled that you joined me today. I'm so excited for this next iteration where startups are able to understand that understanding how we're paying our current employees shouldn't be that big of a lift. Just getting that baseline litmus test, and then we can iterate from there. That's something that really stuck out, that word iterative that you mentioned, like giving ourselves grace to let this be an iterative process, exactly how we would approach any other process in our businesses, seems really critical. Any other takeaways from you that you would love to leave listeners with?
I'll add to that too. Employees and candidates also appreciate the fact that you're iterating. Like, you don't need to have all the answers on day one, but the fact that organizations are working through adding more structure, thinking through it, I think is what people generally appreciate, because then you're transparent that, hey, we're a young organization. We don't have everything figured out, but we're committed to our people, and hence we're working our way through some of these details. Just like a product roadmap or company strategy, your people roadmap keeps changing, and so so does compensation and headcount planning. It's iterative, and you can do it in bite-sized chunks. It's not that hard.
And then as we think about I would say that over the last few years, we've seen and every generation has a different view of this. I would say the contract between employees and employers has become a little bit frayed. As we're seeing lots of layoffs, I think folks are realizing, well, how hard can I go in a company? Because do they have my back? And kind of this piece that I find that there's a lot of trust building that needs to happen there, both between employees and employers. And it sounds like being able to be transparent about where you're at, what are your priorities, and where are you putting steps in place? Where are you putting some levels and some systems in place to protect candidates and protect employees seems like a really strong way to rebuild and restructure that contract to make sure that everyone gets to actually just do their best work and build and thrive together, because this is the innovation economy, right? The work that we're doing is literally changing outcomes of all of our day-to-day lives in the world. So that is kind of the mission of Hustle Hunters, is diversify innovation and make sure that we're able to have all different types of walks of life and people in the seats within this innovation economy. But that only works if we have equitable pay, because historically excluded candidate groups have not been paid at level compensation. Again, we come back to the WNBA with women, lots of folks of color, specifically looking at immigration status has been a huge piece of discrimination on the pay side. So we're seeing some steps forward in terms of pay equity there, but thanks so much for building a platform that helps companies be able to get this right with a pretty low lift. So thank you so much, Haris.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Reach out if you've got questions. Bye.